Well, good morning. This is the lost sermon, and part of what you're going to hear is why it was lost. Not so much that lost from being misplaced, it's just lost due to impossibility. Let's bow our heads just briefly. Jesus, this is difficult stuff. Please join us and make it come from my mouth correctly so it's easy to understand. Amen. All right, so go ahead and start the timer. I'm cool with that. None of this stuff that you're going to hear has any meaning without the Bible. I mean, not to say that it's not of historical interest, because it may be, but it has no true meaning unless we work it with the Bible. So we're going to start with our first text. If I'm lucky. Kevin, save me here. Or not. All right. Our first text is Revelation 17:15. And it says, "And he saith to me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues." Now, that is only important because you need that to figure out the next verse, okay? So, save that one. This is waters are nations and peoples and tongues, all right? And the Bible says it, so let's just go with it. The next verse is Revelation 13:11, okay? This is actually the one we're going to be talking about today. And it says, "I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and spake as a dragon." Now, the key point of this is it came out of the earth. We already know that the waters are peoples and nations and tongues. What we would probably say today are high population areas, okay? So the land would be low population areas. Not necessarily none, but low. All right? Sparse. There are four nations that could qualify. Four, and only four. There's Canada, there's Australia, there's New Zealand, and there's America, U.S. Only four. Canada started due to commerce, furs. New Zealand started due to commerce, furs and whalings. Australia started due to being a penal colony. The United States started for religious liberty. Now, the other interesting thing about the beast is there is no crown. If you look at the beast in other places, in Daniel and in Revelation, there are crowns, and it says those crowns are kings or kingdoms. This beast has no crown. Of the four we just mentioned, there is only one that does not have a monarch. The other three are part of the British Commonwealth, and the Queen of England is their monarch. Only the United States does not have a crown. Only the United States. So, religious freedom, it was the idea. Religious persecution, it was started. Has no crown. The beast has no crown. And three, purely on a biological note, which you may accept or reject as you choose, the buffalo is alleged by some to be the lamb-like beast with two horns, which we had millions and millions of them here, and none of the others had. And if it was going to be Australia, we could have had the kangaroo. I saw a beast that hopped around like a rabbit. That's not what was listed, okay? It was big, but it hopped like a rabbit. The kiwi for New Zealand, I saw an animal that looked like a bird. None of that. Beast with lamb-like horns. So biologically, it fits. So I submit to you that this lamb-like beast is the United States of America. Now, it's got a problem because it speaks like a dragon, okay? Now, first of all, how do we get to speak like a dragon? Well, and here we have Revelation 12:17. And it tells us, the dragon was enraged with the woman and went to make war with the rest of her offspring. So if you want to speak like the dragon, you have to pick on the church, because the remnants of her seed are the church. That is never going to happen in America. That's just not going to happen. Not here. We are the land of religious freedom. There is nobody who's picking on the church. And in fact, if I've heard that once, I've heard it 100 times. It's just not going to happen here. Well, in addition to that, remember that one of the other things that Jesus told us about the end of time was these events were going to happen fast. You know, somebody's in the field, don't go pick up your clothes. If you're on the roof, don't go down. These are things that are going to happen rapidly and fast. And again, even if we're going to pick on the church, it's going to be such a long, drawn-out process that we're going to be able to see it miles away. You know, the idea that it's going to be fast and rapid, that's just not going to happen. Well, in addition to it not going to happen, usually for religious liberty, I would come to you and talk to you about countries like North Korea picking on churches, or Africa, someplace where the church is under attack. Well, the horrible news is this time I'm coming with a new place on the list, and it's us. Okay? In 2020, the church was under attack in America like never before. So, can it happen? Yeah. Did it happen? Well, yeah. But, you know, obviously, it didn't happen here. Well, the first arrest for violating the COVID restriction rules happened in the state of Florida. Yeah, Florida. Well, hold it, we're in Florida. Okay, the first arrest, March 30th, 2020, for violating the rules of COVID restrictions happened to a pastor in a little town called Tampa. And now, in defense, you know, he was given the rules like everybody else, okay, masks and social distancing and so on and so forth. And he videotaped his service as Pastor Brown up in Tampa. And unfortunately, the videotape clearly shows no masks, no social distancing. And by Monday, he was placed under arrest. He was charged with two things. And I want you to remember these two things because I find them to be extremely interesting, the first one especially. Unlawful assembly. Unlawful assembly. Now, the second, okay, violating the public health rules. I understand that, but unlawful assembly for having a church service. Now, you're going to find out that this, hilariously, if you could say it hilariously, is not the worst. There are two places that are significantly worse. Florida was fairly tame. And Florida became tame because 2 days after this arrest, our governor put out a statewide stay-at-home order that said religious services are exempt. So stay at home, but if you want to go to church, it's okay. Now, it's interesting that when that order came out, the prosecutor for that county, Hillsborough County, says, the governor's order sets a baseline for appropriate social distancing, but does not undo Hillsborough's more restrictive standards and does not affect past violations of local orders or law. However, frankly, the truth is that after about 45 days, they decided to drop the charges against this pastor. But he's still the first person arrested, still happened in Florida. At least according to the sheriff, the reason he dropped this was because after the arrest, some of the elders decided, and perhaps the pastor as well, that they took the social distancing standards a little more seriously. They did some of the things we did, and at that point in time, they said, well, they're already complying, so let's Let's get rid of it. Now, let's go to California. Now, we can assume that California is going to be on the interesting edge of the spectrum, but they're not the worst. However, I read this to you because this is what was sent by prosecutors in the state. It has come to the attention of the city prosecutor's office that your facility is not operating in compliance with the order of Governor Newsom. We have information that your church was conducting live indoor church services at the location where anywhere from 50 to 100 people or more attended. 50 people. 50 people. 50 people. If this was in California, you'd be violating the law. This letter is to remind you that violations of these orders are criminal in nature. Each day in violation is a separate violation and carries with it the potential punishment for up to 1 year in jail and a fine for each violation. Your compliance with these orders is not discretionary. It is mandatory. Any violations in the future will subject your church, owners, administrators, operators, pastors, staff, parishioners to the above-mentioned criminal penalties as well as potential closure of your church. Now, it's interesting. After these letters started going out, I'm sorry, but I love the response of the lawyer for the defense. We strongly encourage pastors and religious leaders to follow the teachings of the Holy Scripture and guidance of their conscience regarding whether or how they worship God rather than the arbitrary edicts of the state. I love it when the lawyers get a good one in. Hey. Now, interestingly enough, there was a Judge Scanlon. Now, they lost, by the way. They sued, and they lost in court. They said, you can't do this. And the court said, oh, yeah, you can. But a guy by the name of Judge Scanlon wrote in his dissent that the Constitution emphatically does not allow a state to pursue such measures against religious practices more aggressively than it does against comparable secular activities. That is something you're going to hear again and again and again. Because there are tons of these governors that were totally cool if we're making money, but we're totally against religion. Because we're not making anything off you people. He also wrote, the state cannot evade the free exercise clause merely by linking its severe restrictions on worship attendance to those imposed on one or two categories of corporate or comparable secular activity. It must also justify its decision to treat more favorably a host of other comparable activities which so evidently raise the state's same expressed concerns about disease spread. They lost. No, the government can do that. You must close. You're done here. It's interesting that also in California, a federal judge denied a San Diego church's request, and by the way, this is the only one I could find like this, to hold an Easter service, approximately April of 2020, with social distancing and wearing certain members to wear hazmat suits. If you are communicable or could be communicable, you got to wear a suit. If you are weak and you could get COVID really easily, you'll wear a suit. We will provide the suits. We will socially distance. We will clean. No, you're closed. You don't meet the requirements. Now, interestingly enough, in this mix, our Supreme Court, and by the way, the basic Supreme Court is 6 Catholics, 1 Episcopalian, 1 Protestant, and 1 Jew, so 9. And the Episcopalian was raised Catholic, so essentially 7, 1, and 1. Now, Judge Breyer, who just retired, was a Jew, and it has been replaced by a Protestant. So, it was not expected that anything would happen. Shockingly, the Supreme Court granted injunctive relief during this time to only 3 cases. Just 3. 2 of, well, I'll give you 3.5. 2 out of California, these cases. And Justice Kagan wrote, although the federal courts wrote significant deference to officials with the expertise to assess public health, California's present determination that the maximum number of adherents who can safely worship in the most cavernous cathedral is 0 appears to reflect not expertise or discretion, but instead insufficient appreciation or consideration of the interests at stake. Reversed, you can worship. Interestingly enough, Governor Newsom had already also taken the idea that it's not just churches. All you people have homes, and you folk could have too many people in your homes, and that could spread COVID. So we're stopping that right away. And again, now this came out in 2021, April 9th, they said no. The pandemic-related regulation that had the effect of restricting at-home Bible studies and prayer meetings by limiting all gatherings in private homes to no more than 3 houses at a time? No way. Out the door, they win. Hold your Bible study with 4. 5. Doesn't matter. California lost. Twice. 2 out of the 3. Now, again, this is the lamb-like beast picking on religion. Anybody who lived through this knows that it was quick. We're talking about a year of churches being closed. Now, I don't deny, and some of the bigger churches did, they went immediately to worshiping online. But the point wasn't that they could do that. The point was they shouldn't have had to do that. And the reason they don't have to do that is coming up to some of our other cases, and you'll see why. Kansas was a very interesting state. Kansas introduced all kinds of restrictive measures. They're not going anywhere because the Kansas legislature and the Kansas governor fought in Kansas courts. So the reality is, if you're not in Kansas anymore, you're fine, because they had all the fighting in town. So they kept it in their state. So we don't know much about Kansas. But I do, and you do happen to know a bunch about another state, which is Kentucky. Also happened to be about Easter. Now, in this particular case, the Kentucky governor decided a couple of things. All right, fine. You go hold your services, but we will be sending the state police to your church, and we're going to write down your license plate numbers. And we're going to keep track of who attends, and you're going to take a 14-day quarantine. And by the way, that 14-day quarantine is you stay home. So if you go to church 1 week, 7 days you can't go, 14 days you can't go. The next week, 21 days, you're back. But you didn't get to do anything during those 14 days. Oh, and by the way, people tape their license plates. Go to church, tape their license plates. The state police walk through, and they check their VIN numbers. Look down. If you don't know, they're in your windshield right in front of the driver's area. I can look down with a flashlight if I need it. I can get your VIN number, and I write that down. And guess what pops up if I put in your VIN number? Your license plate, your driver's license, your address, and all your information. I know where you live. And hiding your license plate did no good, but didn't stop plenty of people. You can go online and look at the pictures, covered in duct tape and cardboard. Now, this wasn't the worst. In Louisville, Kentucky, the mayor decided you may not have an outdoor Easter service. One of the pastors in Louisville rented a drive-in movie theater, and he's literally social distancing the cars. So there's a space for a parker, 2 spaces empty, and a parker. So car, 2 spaces, car, 2 spaces, car, and he's having Easter services all day long. I can't do that. All day long, he's having Easter services. Well, the government says no. So Thursday, the church rushes to federal court and says, look, we are way social distancing. I mean, there's 2 parking spaces that are approximately 10 foot apart from every car. Each lane is approximately 10 foot. Each car is at least 10 to 15 foot from every other car. And the people that come in that car, it really doesn't matter, because if you came from the same home, you're within 6 feet of each other at home, so you could be within 6 feet of your other in your car, which the government said, well, what about those people that are in the same car? Well, yes, but they came from the same home, most of them. Well, the government says, well, what if they come from different homes? Well, they're already exposed, so it doesn't harm them anymore to come to church than it will, and they're still separated from everybody else, and we're outdoors. Well, the judge said, yeah, I agree. He said that on Holy Thursday, an American mayor criminalized the communal celebration of Easter. Restraining order granted. Have your Easter and have a lovely time. A mayor, one man, decided Easter was not going to happen in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, in Texas, they filed a lawsuit. They had similar restrictions. They filed a lawsuit. In that case, the governor, after the lawsuit was filed, he filed an executive order saying religious services were essential. And what that happens in law is it means it's moot. It means the problem's already fixed and we're not going to hear it. So those lawsuits were thrown out because once he qualified the churches as essential, they got some of the benefits that essential services happened regularly. Now, keep that in mind, because that's not necessarily what happens in a couple of these other states, but that's what happened in Texas, so they're fine. Now, our next state. Our next state is the poster child for picking on religion. They're not the worst, but they're the poster child, all right? How many people know about Las Vegas? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? It's not Las Vegas. It's a little town in Colorado called Teller County. And in this case, the city of Cripple Creek has 12 casinos. And they rake in hundreds of thousands of dollars in casino revenue every day. So what they decided to do was make a 175-person limit, all right? Unfortunately, the casinos, 11 operate 24/7. They didn't have to comply with that limit. Now, the Charis Bible College, which just happens to be also there, had to comply, although the Bible College has room for 5,000 people. If they social distanced, they still have room for 1,000 people at any given event. They may have 175 like everybody else. Except if you're a casino. If you're a casino, you don't have to do that. Now, they are similar in action to Kansas, okay? And by that I mean they kept theirs in the state. The fight happened in the state. We don't know. It never went to the feds or the Supreme Court because they fought about it in the state, all right? But the point is that a government, and in this case the state of Colorado, decided that it's okay to have our casinos with way more than 175 people, and we're not enforcing social distancing, we're not enforcing masks, we're not enforcing anything because you people are spending your money like crazy, and we're happy to see that. But at the religious place, 175 people out of 5,000. Now, let's go to the nation's capital. Now, it's interesting, in the nation's capital, the fight was very unusual. Because for whatever reason, okay, they decided to take church outside, at least this church. And so the reality is they took their church outside, but unfortunately, the city only allowed 100 people to attend outdoor services. Well, this church has room for many hundreds more. And they still get to social distance, and they're still outside. And in fact, they were still masking. So they're doing everything you have to do inside, and they're doing it outside. They said, no, you may not. You cannot hold outdoor or indoor services with more than 50% capacity or 100 people. Period. That's all. No. 101 violates this rule. They're standing 30 feet apart, and there's 101. You're in violation. Now, remember in California, the letter says, we have information. So somebody ratted somebody out in California. At least in this church, apparently, it was a little different. The police, like in Kentucky, were coming to check. And we're counting. So the church, although it had been meeting outdoors, they said they finally sued. And interesting enough, in Washington, D.C., they go directly to federal court. Okay, they're not a state. So they get to go directly to federal court. And they went right to a judge by the name of McFadden. You got to love Judge McFadden. He says that the Washington, D.C. ignores the church's sincerely held and undisputed belief about the theological importance of gathering in person as a full congregation. It is for the church, not the District of Columbia or this court, to define for itself the meaning of not forsaking assembling ourselves together, Hebrews 10:25. Now, in this particular case, it's Washington, D.C., so it's not like it's some little closed-door church. And they basically said, the department said, look, you can do all kinds of things. How about this? How about everybody stays home and you go online? Okay? And you do it that way. And the church is like, no, we want to meet, we want to come together, and no, we are not doing it online, and so that's where we ended up in district court. Now, additionally, the judge said, the mayor's apparent, and this is wonderful, mayor's apparent encouragement of protests. Now, at the same time this was going on, there was a bunch of protests that were happening also in Washington, D.C., when the mayor was going to these protests with thousands of people. No social distancing, no mask, no nothing, chanting, walking, doing these things. And the mayor was right in the middle of this. And the judge said, the mayor's apparent encouragement of these protests also implies that the district favors some gatherings, protests, over others, religious services. Her actions speak volumes. Given the district's restriction, the church now must choose between violating the law or violating its religious convictions. The church won. No, you may not stop religion. Now, I would ask you to notice a couple of things. There are a couple of arguments, all right, that people say that the churches that got to attend and got to keep going, well, they sold out because they gave in to the government and they decided to wear masks and social distance and clean and things like this. The reality is, just like all the older years where I've come to talk to you, a neutral law of general application applies to everyone. And so if it's a neutral law and it's not particularly aimed at religion, it applies to everyone. So the social distancing issues applied to everyone, which is why if you did those things, the government was out. So if you complied with the health laws and the health restrictions, the government could not, and they were denied the right to pick on you as a church. However, as we saw in Florida, when you didn't do any of that stuff, you were out. You were in trouble. We're going to see that again in a little bit. But another one happens is New Jersey. Now, New Jersey is interesting because they decide that for weddings, funerals, memorial services, it's a maximum of 150 people. Now, that's in September. But previously, the number was 10. Now, I'm not going to ask any girl here who's been married which 10 people she'd like to invite to her wedding. Okay? Now, again, if you count the groom as 9, you got 9 left. And many of the women here, can I marry him outside and have 10 of my closest friends inside? Okay? So you get 10. That is the limit. Now, the outdoor gatherings, you could do 150, but you still needed to social distance. However, if you were, say, a restaurant, you got to have a little more room and a little more leeway. So the Catholic Church and some rabbis and things, they're going to sue right next door in New York. But similar rules. However, in New Jersey, because for whatever reason they didn't get to sue, they, according to the news, in the beginning of, say, April, the police ran in and were able to break up 2 gatherings. Too many people. There were weddings. We immediately broke those up, made everyone scatter and go home. Now, I don't know, did the pastor get to quick finish? You may kiss the bride? We don't know. We don't know. They also broke up another wedding the next day. So we're now up to 3. And then the next day, they went one step too far. They went and broke up some poor rabbi's funeral. So we broke up a couple of the weddings with the Catholic Church, and now we broke up a rabbi's funeral. And at the rabbi's funeral, we cited 15 people, well, actually 14 people, for improper gathering. Right? Another, remember, right to assemble peaceably. 1 got arrested. Now, the 15th person who got arrested for something where he refused to give his identification or his name. He said, I'm here at a funeral. I ain't giving you anything. And they said, fine, you're under arrest. Now, so their argument was, listen, if he'd wanted to get a summons like the other 14 guys, all he had to do was give us his information. And he's like, listen, I don't have to give you anything. I wasn't doing anything unlawful, and I'm not talking to you. Now, this is, remember, I talked about our half. Because this stuff, the Catholic weddings and the Jewish funeral, went up to the Supreme Court. All right? But the Supreme Court didn't rule. What the Supreme Court did is they lost at the lower courts. The lower courts said the government did fine. The appeals court said the government did fine. And the Supreme Court vacated and said, cross out that whole thing. We want you to reconsider that based on what we're going to talk about next. Okay? So they said, they just sent the whole mess back. They put it in a box and sent it back and said, you guys deal with this. So they didn't really rule in anybody's favor, but they did keep the litigation alive because, again, at least as far as the rabbi and the Catholic bishop said, look, we have just, our case is still alive. The Supreme Court didn't grant us what we wanted, but they've canceled what everybody else had done and sent it back. Now, here's the other one of the 3. In New York, now I'm going to read this because it's just amazing. Governor Andrew Cuomo, October 6, 2020. He shut down all non-essential businesses and restricted gatherings at religious institutions to 10 people. Now, he specifically targeted some areas, and one of the areas he targeted was the Orthodox Jewish communities. And he said, for spreading the infection, telling a Thursday briefing, they, the Orthodox Jews, never complied with any of the closed down rules going back to March. Now, I don't know if they did or not, but I will tell you this. That statement itself sounds really discriminatory to me. COVID is all because of the Orthodox Jews. And that's been that way since March. Now, I don't know how many Orthodox Jews we have in Port Charlotte, but I think we should find out. Right? I mean, that's where this is coming from, right? This is the governor of New York who's decided that. Now, that sounds fairly crazy. I will tell you, this isn't the worst yet, and I'm going to try and get us out of here on time. And the Catholic diocese was also involved. They're like, we have imposed social distancing and safety measures beyond all state requirements. They even went so far to placing communion wafers in the congregants' hands rather than on their tongues. They changed their entire way of doing communion to try and keep this at bay. And you may have 10 people in your huge cathedral and take communion. 10. Now, you can line them up outside with social distancing halfway across New York, but only 10 at a time are allowed in your church. They would still be doing communion today if they had done it that way. So, as it turns out, in November 25th, 2020, the Supreme Court said no. The court ruled that the COVID regulations on houses of worship in New York were stricter than those for comparable businesses and were not neutral but discriminatory. Remember, the idea that somebody else is getting a better deal than religion, business, it doesn't matter who. Okay? That's the last time the Supreme Court ruled. Those three. 2 for California, 1 for New York. And we've already gone over how many there are, and I haven't even gotten to the really good ones yet. The next one is Louisiana. Now, they are showing up with over 1,000 people. They, like the Florida church, are not doing anything. Their view is they need to come here to be prayed over. We pray for the sick. If you don't have it, we'll pray for you. If you do have it, we'll pray for you. The whole point is prayer, the prayer of a righteous man is going to help these people. We need this to go. They went up. They were, prosecuted and arrested. And in that case, they were just given summonses. But the point is, they're prosecuted for this. They went to the federal courts. They went through the state courts. They got all the way up to the appeals court, and the Supreme Court refused to hear it. Because, most people believe, they did nothing. They didn't try and comply with any of the health regulations. No masks, no social distancing, no nothing. They just business as usual, and they said, no, you have to do something. The government has come to the realization that COVID is a problem, and you can't cram 1,000 people in this church the same way you used to and expect the government to just say, sure, that's fine. Okay. Now here is a group of people that picked on the wrong people, all right? This is Chicago. I grew up in Chicago. My daughters were born in Illinois. And this is the Romanian Pentecostal Church in downtown Chicago. Okay, so in Chicago, the governor asks for 2-week closure to bottom the curve. They closed. They're totally okay. They closed, no services, no interaction, no nothing. They're totally following the government's request. After the 2 weeks, big box retailers, recreational marijuana stores, and abortion clinics are allowed to open. Churches were allowed to open, but 10 people were the only amount of people that could be in the church, no matter what their sanctuary size. Now, at this point in time, the Romanians are getting a little confused, and you'll kind of hear what happens next, we got the next decision is, oh yeah, you can have 50 people, but you have to take the vaccine, and the vaccine is going to be released in 12 to 18 months, so until that happens, you're stuck with your 10. At this point in time, the Romanian Pentecostals said, no, we're done here. So what they decided to do is they implemented the same ideas. They sanitized the church from top to bottom with a professional cleaning company. They wore masks and face shields, gloves, sanitizers. All that stuff was bought in bulk. The seats were taped off. No one could sit any closer than 6 feet. And the church went well beyond all the safety managers or the safety protocols that were being used by the essential services that were allowed. Okay? However, when the church is now ready to open, the Chicago mayor got the brilliant idea to tow everybody's car in a 9-block radius and blame it on the church. Now, you would think that the neighbors would have been hugely upset. You would be wrong. The people of this 9-block area who just lost their cars, and by the way, you don't get those back for free, by the way. They've been seized by the city. You have to go pay a fee to get that back. There's a fee for the towing, there's a fee for the impound, and there's a fee to get your car back. I would guess in Florida the fee ranges about $375 when they're all combined. These people in the 9-block area who the government expected them to just be so angry because this is happening because of that church. Many of them went down and gave money to the church and said, keep up the good work. The church was surprised. They thought, oh, we better, nope, no. They said no. They were very happy. Neighbor received the impoundment letter blaming them about the church. Neighbors stopped by with encouragement and donations to keep the churches going. That didn't work. So the next thing they did, the next week, they blocked off the parking lot totally and brought in signs that you couldn't park in this area. So that's all right. The Romanians parked in outer Benevia and walked. They walked to church. They're like, fine. It rained, they walked. It was sunny, they walked. It was hot, they walked. They walked. They kept coming to church. They could not stop these people. Then they sent marked squad cars to the church. Okay? Blocking your parking lot isn't working. We're going to block you with the police. I really expected them to give some type of Romanian goodies to the police as they went through, but they did not. But they did keep just passing the police, good morning, officer, and going to church. Now, again, the Romanians had been through this in their country, and as far as they were concerned, the Americans were amateurs. You have no idea. If you really want to stop somebody, you show up at their house at 3 o'clock in the morning and you take them to jail. That's where we come from. But putting a police car in front of our parking lot and making us walk, we needed the exercise. So they kept going. Then the mayor decided she tried to convince the pastor to come down for a little chat. And the pastor said he would be happy to come. He wanted to bring his lawyer. The chat ended. So that was the end of the chat. And the next thing they did was they received an official notice from the Chicago Health Department. They declared them a public health nuisance, and they were going to mow the church down. They were going to immediately, without notice, seize and destroy all church buildings and property. Now, at this point in time, they did sue, and the Supreme Court case is 20-1811. And frankly, what basically happened is COVID ended and everybody put away and went home. But the reality is, that is the government trying to stop worship. That's not the worst. Now, here's my problem. It is 12:11. I can get you out at 12:15 if I stop now, or I can tell you what the worst one is. And it's totally, you want to hear what, all right, I'm just telling you, I'm going to go over, so okay. The worst one Maine. In Maine, Governor Janet Mills prohibited religious assembly at all. And this is kind of interesting, because what she did in this order, there was no religious assembly at all. There was none allowed. But this particular church, the Calvary Chapel, offered a whole bunch of non-religious services. They offered like counseling and drugs and divorce counseling and all these different types of programs. They were okay. They were absolutely okay. The church can perform non-religious services to an unlimited number of people. We don't mind. You are providing non-religious services. Please go ahead. We're not trying to stop you. We need you to help our people. You can have soup kitchens. You can do whatever you want. But the moment you opened a Bible, you had to comply with no religious services. Now, liquor stores, marijuana dispensaries are all essential. You can have as many of them open as you want. And again, they said they were essential. Your services are essential, as long as you don't bring in the B-I-B-L-E. They're essential. So in this case, the pastor decided he's going to remain open. He did the social distancing and the sanitizing. And, you know, the reality is they even argued with one of the judges. They said the moment his Bible is opened, even as part of a life skills, food, shelter, or addiction program, the entire operation violates Governor Mills' legal orders. Okay? So the judge asked the state attorney who was defending the case, he said, okay, what if an essential business gathers at the beginning of their shifts to review the tasks for the day? Is that okay? Oh yeah, totally okay. Totally okay. And the judge said, well, what would happen if a morally uplifting message was delivered at that meeting for the employees? And the attorney replied, I was afraid of hypothetical questions like this. Okay, the attorney never answered the question. But the reality is, from Governor Mills' decisions, it had no meaning. The moment you touched a Bible and turned it open, the meeting is over. You got to get out of there. And it doesn't matter. Social distancing doesn't matter. Clean, none of that stuff mattered. The issue was religion. If you're religious, you got to go. It's over. Now, the other thing is about that time, soon after this, while these lawsuits were working, I don't know whether it's because of the population in Maine or how it worked, but apparently the Maines were basically down to 137 deaths and only 432 hospitalizations. So they're basically, winding down as far as COVID, and they're still demanding that this church close. And they fought this and fought, and basically this pastor just said, I ain't doing it. I'll clean the place, we'll follow all the mandates, and we kept going. So, what's the answer? Well, the answer is, I think, and I would argue to you folk, that clearly we now know that it can happen fast. Churches were closed in a matter of weeks, months at the most. Okay? They were just closed. And you've heard about how churches tried to open. I mean, this clearly was, and I would submit to you that the lamb-like beast is the United States. And all the things that we were like, it'll take forever. Less than a year. Not even, listen, some people would argue weeks, but at least months. Not into years, anywhere near years. By the time January to the end of March and Easter, churches are closed. You can go online, you can do it any way you want to, but you're not doing it in person. in many of these states. Now, many states fought amongst themselves, and that really, we don't know what that answer is, because it didn't go to federal courts, so we don't have the federal answer. We could go look it up for the state, but the point is keeping it in state meant that it only applies to that state. Okay? Florida, once Governor DeSantis changed the rules, nobody sued. We don't have any suits going. We were allowed to come back to worship. But I would use that word, and notice the word I used, allowed. We're allowed to come back to worship. Now, and the reason I mentioned a couple of those things where I said that the right to assemble, the First Amendment, when it talks about things, okay, the first 5 freedoms that were given is speech, religion, assembly, press, and the right to petition the government. Now, it's clear we were allowed to petition the government because they took them through the appeals. Many, as we heard, 3 of them got to the Supreme Court. But there's no free speech, there was no freedom of religion, and no freedom of assembly. You could not peacefully assemble. Well, as long as there was more than 10 of you. Many of the states had a 10-person limit for religion. We've heard about many of them. Okay, and the outdoor numbers are higher, but why do we have outdoor numbers at all? Many of the professionals in COVID says, as long as you're outdoors and you're social distancing, you're fine. And in fact, many bars kept their outdoor locations wide open for more than 10 people. Okay, but if you were a church, that was different. And that is basically the argument that was made again and again and again, that if you're going to do it to these, like the casinos in Colorado, and let them have all these people, because they generate money, we have a religious right to at least that many folks. And since they didn't do anything to the casinos because they didn't want to upset the cash flow, the churches should have had the same benefit. And again, those churches were social distancing. They were trying all kinds of things. They have room for 5,000, and they get 175. Now, that's bad, but like I said, I think the worst was Maine, where you get 0. Nobody can come to church. The moment it's religious, we're done here. The meeting must end. This gathering in Maine, the police would already be here. All right? So yes, we have what I would call a dry run. For those of you that are paying attention, this is the beast with the lamb-like horns who couldn't do what it did, and we're all alive to see how it worked. Okay? Less than a year, no church at all for a time, follow government mandates to reopen. If you want to reopen, you can do this, but you have to follow the government guidelines to reopen. And by the way, as I showed you, if you didn't follow the government guidelines, absolutely 0 review, no chance, no hope. You have to follow the government guidelines to reopen, or you don't reopen. And remember, they're criminal penalties for each and every time you appear. And each person. If I were the pastor and I'm standing here, it's not just me. I go, Kevin goes, and his mother goes. Everybody goes. We all go. In handcuffs. And they got to bring in extra police from the neighboring county to take us all away. The point is that it's criminal. We all go, we get processed, we come back. Okay? And if they choose, as they did in the one case with the 14-day quarantine, you're mandated to not come to church for 2 weeks. That was the one in Kentucky. So if I got you, that's one. I know you were here. Now you got 14 days. It starts tomorrow. You're going to miss church for 2 weeks. No matter what you did, no matter how much social distancing, no matter any of that stuff. All right? So I would argue that we've had our run-through. I would argue that all of us now know that it can happen. All of us know that it can happen really fast. And all of us should know that our salvation is closer than it was the day before. Thank you very much.